Graham Prescott's fingers were already buried in Elena Ruiz's throat when his fist cracked across Mitchell Clark's scarred jaw and the heel of his designer boot slammed into Atlas's ribs with a sound that ran the length of the marble corridor outside hearing room 4B. Elena's back hit the wall hard enough to rattle the framed donor plaques, and the silver lanyard at her neck snapped sideways as Prescott lifted, not all the way off the floor, just enough to steal leverage from her legs. Her airway narrowed in jerks. She clawed at his wrist with both hands, nails scraping skin, eyes wet and furious and shocked at once. A paper folder spilled from her left arm and fanned across the polished floor, pages stamped, denied, in red at the top corners like someone had wanted the word to be visible from a distance. Mitchell absorbed the punch, half-turned, and felt old scar tissue light up along his jawline like a live wire under skin. Copper flooded his mouth. He tasted blood and stale coffee and the chemical chill of hospital air. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed with that thin electrical whine that never stopped in institutional buildings, and somewhere down the hall an IV pump kept beeping from an unattended station, regular and small and obscene against the sound Lena made, trying to pull in air. Atlas had taken the boot just behind his left foreleg and slid 2 inches on the stone before regaining his stance. 86 pounds of train control shuddered, settled, then locked. His tan and black saddleback coat went dark as iron under the corridor lights. His ears pinned forward. His body went rigid. A low growl started in his chest, quiet at first, the kind of sound Mitchell felt in his teeth before his ears. By Mitchell's count, 27 people watched from the benches, badge checkpoint, and doorway thresholds around hearing room 4B, and not one moved. A clerk in a navy blazer stared at her clipboard so hard her knuckles paled around the pen, as if neat handwriting might count as neutrality. 2 security officers stood at the metal detector arch with department patches on their sleeves and their weight fixed backward on their heels, each waiting for the other to become the first man with a spine. A man in a contractor vest, wearing a visitor sticker, stepped behind a water cooler and pretended to read a notice about parking validation. An older veteran with a cane shifted his gaze to the floor tiles, jaw working, shoulders caving inward, as if he had seen this exact equation before and already knew who institutions protected when money shouted first. Nobody helped. Prescott laughed once, clipped and bright. To Mitchell, it sounded like the laugh of a man who had never finished paying for a lesson because somebody else always covered the bill. He wore white designer sneakers that had never met mud, a black leather jacket soft with expensive treatment, and a watch face that flashed gold when he moved. He tightened his hand around Elena's throat and leaned close enough that his breath fogged briefly against her cheek. "You think forms matter?" he said. "You think signatures beat me?" Elena tried to answer and managed only a ragged sound. Her face had started to color at the edges, red pushing toward purple beneath olive skin. One of her shoes slipped on the polished floor and twisted sideways. Mitchell tracked every detail without seeming to move, pulse slowing the way it always did when a room crossed from argument into threat. He saw Prescott's thumb pressing under Elena's jaw. He saw the exact angle of her trachea under pressure. He saw the camera dome above the exit sign, red indicator light on. Recording. Prescott's next words came louder, pitched for the room, for the witnesses, for the public ritual men like him treated as sport. "My father put his name on this pavilion," he said. "This wing works for us." A woman on the second bench pulled out her phone, then flipped it face down in her lap without dialing. A man in scrubs with a trauma badge clipped to his chest stepped backward through a doorway and let the door close on its soft hinge. The sound was tiny. It landed like a verdict. Mitchell had been in firefights where dust and radio static and incoming rounds collapsed time into instinct. This felt cleaner and more rotten. Polished stone, climate control, donor walls, and a woman being choked in full view of an administrative hearing posted as Veteran Services Appeals in federal blue lettering. He flexed his left hand once. Atlas shifted half a step, still silent except for the growl rolling low and steady. Mitchell felt the leash tension transmit through scarred fingers and into his forearm like a current from a known source. No confusion in it. Warning, confirmation. The dog had already read the room and filed threat priority before anyone in human clothes decided what policy allowed. Prescott looked down at Atlas and made a mistake Mitchell had seen before. He saw fur, teeth, mass. He did not see history. He did not see scent discrimination under mortar smoke or a disciplined hold under gunfire or the years of obedience built where panic killed people. He just saw an animal in his corridor, in his building, near his shoes. He kicked again, fast and mean. The sound of boot against rib echoed off marble and glass. Atlas did not yelp. He did not break position. His ears stayed forward, his tail leveled. The growl deepened by one dangerous note that made the nearest security officer finally take one half step forward and then stop when Prescott snapped his head toward him. "Stand down," Prescott said, never taking his hand off Elena's throat. "Or lose your badge by lunch." The officer froze. His radio crackled once and went quiet. Mitchell wiped blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand and tasted iron again. His NWU Type 3 blouse sat square on his shoulders, damp at the collar from exertion and old pain he carried like weather in bone. Early gray touched his temples. A pale scar ran from the corner of his jaw toward his ear, thin as chalk line. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He did not fill silence with warning speeches men like Prescott mistook for negotiation. He watched Elena's fingers weaken on Prescott's wrist. He watched her knees start to fold. The corridor narrowed to essentials. Airway, distance, timing, camera angle, leash length, boot placement, line of approach, threat hand, secondary hand, witness field, exits. Prescott leaned in and hissed at Elena, "You file one more appeal packet, and you're done in this town." Elena's eyes found Mitchell's for a fraction of a second. Not pleading, not surrender. Just air-starved fury and the refusal to disappear quietly in a hallway built from donor money and polished shame. Mitchell's hand tightened on Atlas's leash. Then Atlas moved. Not forward, not yet. He shifted from standby to active engagement posture, shoulders lowering a fraction, hind legs loading, gaze hard on Prescott's centerline. The chain link on his tactical collar clicked once. That tiny metal sound cut through the corridor and rearranged people's faces. The clerk with the clipboard finally looked up. One guard swallowed and set his feet apart without realizing he had done it. Even Prescott's smile thinned when he heard the growl now. Full and resonant, thunder gathering under discipline. Power changed shape before anybody spoke. "Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe and stay until the end if you believe veterans should never have to beg for dignity in a building built to serve them." This hearing did not end with paperwork. It ended with a family name collapsing in public record. Now let's go back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that corridor made sense until you understood Elena Ruiz, Mitchell Clark, and the dog who never mistook cruelty for authority. Then Atlas moved. It happened in less than a second and stayed with everyone in that corridor for months. The camera above the exit sign caught the shift from one frame to the next. 86 pounds of German Shepherd settling into a lower center of gravity, shoulders angling, front paws adjusting 1 inch on polished stone for traction, eyes locking on Graham Prescott's sternum, like a targeting laser finding center mass. No bark, no lunge, no wasted movement. Mitchell felt the change travel up the leash into his palm, and he knew Atlas had switched from warning to readiness the way he had done in Kandahar, when a wire was buried where only a trained nose could find it. Prescott noticed it too, even if he did not understand it. His fingers stayed on Elena's throat, but his grin flattened at the edges as Atlas's growl deepened and rolled through the marble like distant thunder trapped indoors. 27 people were still within 10 yards of Hearing Room 4B. 27 adults with badges, clipboards, trauma credentials, security uniforms, legal folders, and polished shoes. Not one of them stepped between a choking woman and the man hurting her. A retired staff sergeant on the third bench tightened both hands on his cane and stared at a scuff mark on the floor, jaw ticking once, then twice, as if his body still knew what action looked like, and his institution had trained it out of him. Nobody helped. Mitchell's breath slowed. Combat had burned panic out of him years ago and left math in its place. Distance from him to Prescott, 6 feet. Prescott's weight distribution, forward on left leg, right shoulder loaded from the punch he had just thrown. Elena's airway compromise, worsening, visible retractions at the base of her throat, lips darkening. Security response, delayed by fear and hierarchy, not incapacity. Camera coverage, full angle from dome cam, partial from checkpoint cam, unknown from personal devices. Atlas's status, alert, controlled, waiting for command. Mitchell tasted blood along his back molars and cataloged all of it with the same brutal calm he had used when radio chatter and rotor wash collided over a Yemen rooftop. Prescott made the mistake rich men made when accountability had always been optional. He looked at Mitchell's split lip and old scar and saw age. He looked at NWU Type 3 camouflage and saw costume. He looked at Atlas and saw liability. He did not see the years that made restraint more dangerous than rage. He did not see the man who had held pressure on a dying teammate's neck while waiting for a medevac that came too late. He did not see the dog that had stood in dust and gunfire and still obeyed hand signals with surgical precision. "Control your mutt," Prescott said, voice louder now, performing for the hallway. "Or I'll have him put down." Helena made a strangled sound and got one word out anyway. "Don't." It was not a plea to Prescott. It was to Mitchell, and it carried the same stripped-down defiance he had seen in medics under incoming fire, who kept packing wounds while rounds snapped overhead. Her hands were losing strength on Prescott's wrist. Her knees bent hard, then buckled, and only his grip kept her vertical against the wall. A donor plaque above her shoulder reflected fluorescent light into her eyes. Leonard Prescott's name gleamed in brushed steel 30 inches from her face, while his son tightened his hand on her airway. Power had a logo here. Atlas's ears pinned farther forward, his body locked. A low, resonant vibration built in his chest, the sound of discipline under pressure. Mitchell did not need to look down to know the exact set of the dog's hind legs. He had felt that configuration in desert compounds on freight ramps and once in a Norfolk parking structure when a stranger reached too fast toward Mitchell's blind side at 0217. Atlas never guessed. Atlas assessed. Atlas was never theatrical. He was a witness first, force second. A security officer lifted a hand toward his radio, glanced at Prescott, and dropped it. Cowardice was procedural now. Prescott shifted his stance and dragged Elena half a step sideways, as if moving her body made the scene his to direct. "You file one more packet," he said into her face, "and you won't work in this county again." His watch flashed gold. His cuff brushed her jaw. Mitchell caught the detail that would matter later. Prescott's thumb pressing under mandibular angle, fingers compressing from lateral position, not a defensive hold, but a deliberate choke. Camera evidence? Clear intent? Mitchell spoke, and the corridor quieted around the words. "Let her go." 3 words. Calm, cold, final. The kind of voice that made people who understood violence stop moving and people who didn't finally hear it coming. Prescott turned his head toward Mitchell without releasing Elena. And he laughed once, brittle this time, performing dominance because he could feel it slipping and had no other language. "My father owns this building," he said. "This hearing is ours." The declaration hung in disinfectant air, beside the beep of that unattended IV pump and the fluorescent hum, and even the clerk with the clipboard flinched, as if she already knew the sentence would age badly by nightfall. Then Prescott reached with his free hand toward Atlas's collar. Mitchell did not blink. Atlas rose 1 inch, enough to show line and intent, muzzle lifting, shoulders square, eyes fixed on the incoming hand. No barking, no snap, just the pure geometry of consequence. Prescott's fingers stopped midair. For the first time since he had grabbed Elena, genuine uncertainty crossed his face, quick and small, but real. He saw something in Mitchell's expression he had never seen in boardrooms or fundraising dinners or committee hearings under his family name. Not anger, not bravado. Professional certainty. He had no idea what that look cost to earn. The guard by the metal detector finally keyed his radio and said, "Too late. Code response, 4B corridor." His voice shook on the second word. The other guard moved 2 steps forward, then hesitated again when Prescott snapped, "Stand down." Chain of command and payroll met in one hallway and froze another man in place. Elena's heel skidded. Her folder pages were still scattered across the marble, red denied stamps staring up at 27 pairs of shoes that had decided not to move. Mitchell shifted his left foot 5 inches, placing himself on Prescott's blindside angle, while keeping leash tension clean and deliberate. Atlas mirrored without command, a veteran move born of years working as one unit. Prescott noticed the repositioning too late. He was still trying to run a social script in a tactical moment, still believing volume outranked preparation, still believing family names functioned as shields in every room. He opened his mouth to repeat himself, to invoke his father again, to turn violence into administration. He never got the sentence out. The narrator cut the footage there, right at the held breath where Elena's airway was seconds from full collapse. Atlas was coiled under absolute control, and a man who had never heard the word no was about to hear it from the only language he recognized. Before the corridor moved again, before the first officer found enough backbone to choose law over lineage, there was one pause that turned strangers into witnesses, and witnesses into a community with a memory. Before the story went forward, the narrator looked straight through the screen and asked where people were watching from, because justice like this never belonged to one hallway in one building. Cities answered. Small towns answered. Base housing answered. Night shift break rooms answered. He asked viewers to subscribe if they believed veterans should not have to bleed in public to get care promised in writing, and the request was not marketing gloss. It was a roll call of people unwilling to look away when institutions flinched. He told them to stay until the end because this was not a scuffle, not a misunderstanding, not tempers in a bad corridor. This would become record. Comments stacked by the minute, while the frame stayed frozen on Prescott's hand, hovering near Atlas's collar, and Elena's fingers slipping from his wrist. A respiratory therapist in Tacoma wrote that she had watched supervisors bury incident reports under workflow concerns. A former corpsman in Pensacola wrote that he knew the sound a man made when his airway narrowed and said he had to pause the video twice. A courthouse clerk in Cedar Falls wrote that power always called itself policy until someone put it under oath. People kept typing where they were from, as if naming a place was a way of standing up in a room where nobody had stood up when it counted. That was the point of the pause. Not spectacle. Accountability. The narrator reminded them what was visible even before backstory. A woman in scrubs being choked outside a veterans hearing room. A decorated operator bleeding from the mouth and still measured enough to speak 3 words. A German shepherd with a tan and black saddleback coat, gone dark as iron under hospital light, holding discipline at the edge of force. 2 security officers caught between paycheck fear and duty. 27 bystanders with enough reasons to do nothing and exactly 0 excuses. He said, "Stay with this," because the next part would explain why Graham Prescott believed he could do this in public, why Elena Ruiz kept filing packets she knew might disappear, and why Atlas recognized the shape of danger before anyone else admitted it existed. The frozen frame stayed on screen 3 more seconds, long enough for people to see what they had missed at full speed. Prescott's thumb pressure under Elena's jawline, Mitchell's left hand steady on the leash despite blood at the corner of his mouth, the red recording light above the exit sign, the page nearest Elena's shoe stamped "Denied" with a timestamp in the upper right corner, physical evidence in plain view, truth already archived before anybody in authority decided whether truth was convenient. When the narrator finally let the footage breathe again, he did not soften his voice, and he did not offer anyone in that corridor moral cover. He said this started long before the chokehold and the boot strike, and it started where most institutional violence started: paperwork, signatures, private committees, and men who called profit efficiency. Then he rewound to the beginning, to Elena Ruiz walking into dawn after another overnight shift, to Mitchell Clark waking at 0200 with memories that felt like live rounds, and to Atlas, retired on paper, still working every time his handler forgot how to breathe in the dark. Elena Ruiz stepped out of the employee entrance at 6:12 a.m., with disinfectant still in her hair and the night's alarms still ticking in her ears, and the autumn air behind the Prescott Veterans Pavilion felt cleaner than anything she had breathed for 12 hours. She stood there for a count of 5 because if she walked too quickly, after a double-coated respiratory floor, the hallway adrenaline followed her home, and she scared her nephew by opening doors too hard. Her scrub tops smelled like chlorhexidine, coffee gone bitter in a thermal cup, and the faint metallic note that clung to oxygen fittings. She had a fresh pressure line across her cheek from the N95 she had worn through half the shift, and a red indentation where her badge reel had bounced against her sternum while she ran from room to room. 31. Former Army medic. 3 tours, 1 in Helmand and 2 at aid stations that taught her how quickly breathing became the only thing that mattered. She had never unlearned that hierarchy. The bus stop outside the pavilion held 7 people that morning, all of them in work shoes, all of them avoiding eye contact in the way people did when rent was due. Elena took Route 14 north to Cedar and Fulton, then climbed the narrow exterior stairs over Rosales Laundry. where warm detergent steam leaked through the floorboards and made the whole apartment smell like soap and hot metal by noon. It was one bedroom, one pull-out couch, one narrow galley kitchen with a stove that clicked twice before lighting, and one refrigerator door that had to be closed with a hip check or it had drifted open by an inch. Mateo was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the coffee table, with a pencil in his mouth and a workbook open to multiplication tables. 8 years old. Dark hair that refused combs. A missing front tooth he showed to everyone like a medal. He looked up when she came in and said, "You're late," with the solemn authority of a child who measured safety in routines. "I know," she said, dropping her bag beside the couch. "Mr. Hanley crashed his sats twice." Mateo nodded as if he understood oxygen saturation and crisis response, then slid a folded paper toward her. It was a drawing of Atlas, blocky ears too large, paws the size of dinner plates, and a patch sewn crooked onto the dog's harness in bright blue crayon. Mateo had labeled it with careful letters, a TLAS. "He needs this one," Mateo said. The other one was sad. Elena touched the drawing and felt the old ache in her chest that never left, only shifted weight. Her sister Sophia had died 3 years earlier in a rain-slick intersection when a delivery truck missed a red light by 2 seconds. Since then, mornings belonged to math homework, cheap cereal, packed lunches, and the unglamorous logistics of keeping one small boy convinced the world still had adults who showed up. Elena slept in 4-hour blocks when she could. She set 3 alarms and still woke before the first one. By the second week of September, she had started carrying Mitchell Clark's appeal folder in a waterproof document sleeve because one spilled coffee would have erased 2 months of work. Mitchell's first denial came coded non-service-related anxiety disorder, despite documented blast exposure and command affidavits. The second denial said incomplete evidence submission, though Elena had personally scanned every page and watched the upload confirmation spin green. The third denial used language that read machine-generated, same clause order, same punctuation, same detached refusal. She printed each letter, highlighted mismatches, cross-referenced dates, and walked the packet through internal intake herself at 7:40 between shift handoff and bus transfer. She did it because she had watched veterans with less stamina stop appealing after the 4th envelope. She did it because silence was how systems waited people out. Mitchell never asked for special treatment. That was part of what made Elena angrier. He showed up in NWU Type 3 digital camouflage. Shoulders square, beard trimmed close, scar pale along his jaw like an old fault line. He sat near the end of waiting room rows, never with his back to a door, never where someone could approach from behind. Atlas sat at his left boot and tracked every movement in the room with disciplined stillness. Tan and black saddleback coat, catching gold in morning light through the east windows and turning dark as iron under fluorescent panels when clouds moved in. When paperwork delays stacked, Mitchell's right hand shook once near the thumb joint. Atlas would press his head into Mitchell's knee. The shaking stopped. One Thursday after midnight rounds, Elena found Mitchell outside respiratory consult B with both palms braced on the corridor wall, breathing in short, controlled pulls that were almost silent but too fast for rest. Atlas was already in contact, shoulder against Mitchell's shin, gaze lifted, waiting. "Headache?" Elena asked. Mitchell nodded without looking up. "Flash and sound. Light sensitivity?" "Yeah." She dimmed the exam room before bringing him in, closed the blinds, and spoke in clipped, practical lines that left no room for pride or shame. "Sit. Water first. Then neurocheck. You're not wasting anyone's time." Mitchell obeyed the first two commands and flinched at the third, as if permission to need care still felt like disobedience. Atlas lay down where he could see both door and handler, paws crossed, ears rotating with each hallway footstep. After she finished the assessment, Elena pulled up his claim notes and felt her jaw tighten. The denial language had updated again that afternoon. New phrasing. Same outcome. She printed the page, wrote down the metadata timestamp in black pen, and said, "I'm filing supplemental evidence at 0600. Mitchell wiped his face once with a scarred hand. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." He met her eyes for a moment, and she recognized the look from field medicine years ago. The exhausted suspicion of someone waiting for help to turn transactional. Elena had seen it in Marines with tourniquets, and in civilians on cots under buzzing lights. She answered it the only way she trusted, with work. 3 days later, she used her lunch break to call the VA Records Integrity Desk and report discrepancy patterns in 12 PTSD denials routed through the same review queue. The line clerk took her report number, spoke in polished neutral phrases, and told her to upload documentation through standard channels. Elena hung up, documented the call outcome in her notebook, and kept going. No theatrics, no speeches, just accumulation. By early October, her kitchen wall had 3 sticky notes above the toaster: Mateo school pickup times, overnight shift swaps, and Mitchell evidence deadlines written in red block letters. She taught Mateo to microwave rice without touching the steam, and to text her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarado, if she ran late past 7:30. She left $5 taped under the sugar canister for emergency milk. She stopped buying takeout entirely. Every spare minute went to chart review, claim language comparison, and assembling the timeline that would either force a hearing or bury the truth one folder deeper. Good people in the building noticed and looked away. A billing specialist told her quietly in the supply closet, "Don't attach your name to those packets. Prescott's committee tracks who pushes back." A social worker with 22 years at the hospital said, "I'm proud of you," then refused to sign witness verification. A junior physician squeezed her shoulder in passing and whispered, "Be careful," without breaking stride. Nobody argued the facts. They argued survivability. Elena understood the fear. She hated it anyway. When she finally got hearing confirmation for room 4B, she printed 3 copies of everything: claim chronology, service records, neurologist findings, coding anomalies, denial metadata. 1 copy for official submission, 1 for Mitchell, 1 for herself in a manila envelope that stayed in her locker, behind a spare pair of socks and an energy bar. She did not trust one point of failure anymore. At 2:03 a.m. on the Monday before the hearing, she sat on the edge of her pull-out couch while Mateo slept in the bedroom and stitched a rectangular patch onto Atlas's old harness by hand because the seam had torn near the D-ring. Her stitches were not pretty, but they held. She remembered Sophia teaching her to thread needles at the kitchen table and pressing Elena's fingers flat when she rushed. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Sophia had said it as a joke, borrowing military language she barely understood. Elena smiled once in the dark and kept sewing until the line sat straight. Across town, Graham Prescott was finishing bourbon in an office with his family name etched in frosted glass. Leonard Prescott had built half the waterfront, bought the other half through shell partnerships, and attached Prescott to every public-facing structure that could launder philanthropy into immunity. Prescott Veterans Pavilion, Prescott Women's Imaging Center, Prescott Civic Lecture Hall. His son grew up inside that architecture of consequence-free behavior and mistook it for merit. Graham was 28, square-jawed in the way magazines called clean-cut, cufflinks more expensive than a respiratory therapist's monthly grocery budget, and permanently amused by rules that existed for people without donor dinners. He chaired the pavilion's Efficiency Task Force, a title bland enough to pass scrutiny and powerful enough to reroute lives. The mechanism looked technical on paper. Case reviews flagged high-cost behavioral claims for coding reassessment. Reassessment generated denial probability scores. Denials triggered referral recommendations to outside treatment partners for continuity of care. Those partners belonged to a private network financed by Prescott-backed foundations and managed through layered LLCs whose boards shared surnames with city council donors. Publicly, it was innovation. In practice, it was a profit pipeline that converted service trauma into billable dependency beyond federal oversight. Graham liked to explain it with one sentence. We stop waste. What he meant was control. At a Wednesday committee meeting on the pavilion's 5th floor, he sat at the head of a walnut conference table, while 12 administrators pretended this was normal governance. The room smelled like polished wood, expensive cologne, and fear disguised as professionalism. A compliance attorney cleared her throat over a slide showing denial upticks in combat-related neurological claims. These percentages may invite external audit, she said carefully. Graham didn't look at the slide. He looked at her. Then phrase your concern as process refinement, not panic. A hospital VP tried a different angle. The Ruiz submissions are very detailed. If hearing officers receive full metadata, they won't, Graham said. The sentence ended the discussion because everyone at the table understood the map. Hearing officers rotated under administrative leadership. Administrative leadership reported to board committees. Board committees relied on donor blocks. Donor blocks answered to money with a surname carved into buildings and campaign checks. The chain wasn't hidden. It was celebrated at galas. By the end of October, 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office were taking off-duty security contracts at the pavilion through a private vendor linked to Prescott Development Holdings. They wore county patches and answered to payrolls that crossed lines on paper. No one in public bothered tracing. One deputy, Mallory, had 19 years in uniform, and a pension calculation he protected like glass. The other, Briggs, had a son starting college and 3 maxed credit cards. Both men told themselves they were keeping order in tense hearings. Both men had learned when to ignore a raised voice if it came from a familiar last name. Graham never threatened them directly. He didn't need to. He preferred theater. He walked hallways in leather jackets over tailored shirts, white sneakers spotless on rainy days, watch glinting whenever he pointed at staff badges and asked who authorized this or who approved that. He filmed workflow bottlenecks on his phone, narrated them for internal chat threads, and laughed when employees straightened under the lens. He called nurses by first names without invitation. He called physicians by surnames when he wanted dominance. He called veterans cases when he forgot cameras might still be on. Everyone knew his favorite sentence. My father owns this wing. He said variations daily, and each repetition trained the building. When Elena's name started appearing across denial challenge packets, Graham asked for her file. HR refused formally, then sent him her schedule informally within 48 hours. He scanned shift times, saw the overnight blocks, saw the nephew emergency contact listed twice, and smiled in the way people smiled when they believed private information was leverage, not responsibility. He marked her as non-compliant staff influencer in an internal note and forwarded it to 3 managers with one line: address culture issue. By the first week of November, staff who had chatted with Elena in break rooms started checking corners before speaking. A respiratory tech who once offered to co-sign witness statements, suddenly apologized and said she had family obligations. A records clerk deleted a draft email she had written to federal oversight and emptied her trash folder before lunch. An intake coordinator moved Elena's packet to the bottom of a processing stack by mistake and then cried in a supply closet for 10 minutes after shift change. Graham never had to raise his voice in those interactions. Systems did the raising for him. He believed he was untouchable because every prior test had confirmed it. In college, a bar assault charge vanished after a witness recanted. At 25, a procurement irregularity became a clerical misunderstanding. At 27, an internal harassment complaint dissolved when the complainant transferred out of state. Each escape hardened him. Consequence to Graham Prescott was a rumor people told each other to stay obedient. On the evening before hearing room 4B, he stood on the pavilion balcony overlooking the ambulance bay, while rain needled the floodlights, and said to his friend Carter Hammond, "Tomorrow I shut this down for good." Carter adjusted his $400 sunglasses on top of his head, though it was already dark. "The SEAL guy?" "The therapist and the SEAL," Graham said. "One hearing, one correction." He checked his reflection in the glass door, smoothed his jacket cuff, and added, almost bored, "If they push it, I'll remind them who signs this town's checks." Inside, housekeeping staff mopped the corridor outside 4B until the marble reflected the donor wall like a second sky. Inside, security checked badge readers and tested radios that would later crackle without courage behind them. Inside, Elena sealed 3 evidence packets and wrote Mitchell Clark in block letters across each tab so no one could claim confusion. Inside, Mitchell sat in his apartment, in the same NWU Type 3 blouse he would wear the next day, Atlas's head against his boot. Both of them, listening to rain, hit the window in uneven bursts while sleep refused to come. The corridor had not happened yet. The chokehold had not happened yet. But by midnight, every line that led to that hallway was already in place. Mitchell was still awake when the rain changed from needles to a steady sheet against his apartment window, each drop flattening into a hiss that sounded too much like rotor wash when he let his mind go loose. He sat at the edge of his couch in NWU, Type 3 blouse and utility pants, boots unlaced, elbows on knees, one hand resting on Atlas's collar, so he could feel something living and solid under his palm. The room was small and disciplined. Folded blanket at right angle, hearing packet on the table, 2 coffee mugs in the sink, 1 lamp on low. He kept spaces clean because clutter looked like threat in the dark. He kept his uniform on because fabric and pattern and familiar seams were armor his body recognized before his mind did. Atlas lay against his shin, eyes open, ears rotating toward every stairwell sound outside the door. At 0:41, Mitchell tried to lie down. By 0:44, he was upright again, breath shallow, throat tight, heart pounding as if somebody had kicked open a rooftop hatch. He hated this part most. Not fear, not pain. The betrayal of ordinary silence. He stood, paced 3 steps to the kitchenette, 3 steps back, and braced one hand against the wall when a blast headache flashed behind his left eye. White burst. Nausea. A pulse that felt like a fist closing inside his skull. Atlas rose immediately, pressed shoulder into Mitchell's thigh, and leaned just enough to interrupt the spiral. No sound, no drama. Contact and weight and command memory doing their work. Mitchell swallowed, counted, and kept counting until his hands stopped shaking. The window reflected him in fractured pieces, broad shoulders gone rigid, gray at the temples catching lamplight, scar line pale along the jaw where old tissue never moved quite right. People saw that face and called him stoic, They never saw 0200, when his lungs forgot the present and tried to breathe through dust and burning insulation and someone else's blood. A train horn sounded far downriver. In his body, it became a radio squawk. Yemen came back in hard fragments, not as story, but as impact. Concrete roof wet with diesel mist. Daniel Voss beside him behind a low parapet, headset crooked, grin gone in a blink when incoming fire ricocheted off the stairwell housing. Mitchell remembered shouting for suppression, remembered Atlas's predecessor, MWD team, 2 buildings over, remembered seeing Daniel reach to signal, and then fold with one hand clamped at his neck, where red came through his fingers too fast. "Pressure! Pressure! Pressure!" Mitchell had said into Daniel's ear, though he did not know whether Daniel heard him over gunfire and rotor delay and the chaos of 3 channels talking at once. He had packed the wound with gauze until his own knuckles slipped. He had held Daniel's head in his lap, while the extraction bird circled for clearance that never came on time. He had listened to a medic on comms say 12 more minutes, and known by the feel of skin and pulse that 12 was a lifetime. Daniel had looked at him once, eyes glass-bright and furious, and whispered, "Don't let them file me as delay." Mitchell never forgot that sentence. By 1:18, the rain eased, but the memory did not. He was back in his apartment, one hand on the counter edge, breathing through copper taste that wasn't there. Atlas pushed his muzzle into Mitchell's palm, then lifted and set his chin against Mitchell's sternum, a practiced interruption they had repeated hundreds of nights. Mitchell dropped his forehead to the dog's head and stayed there until the room stopped tilting. "Still here," he said quietly. Atlas's tail thumped once against the cabinet. 3 days after Yemen, a command chaplain had offered him language about sacrifice and honor in a quiet room at Coronado. Mitchell had nodded through all of it and slept 90 minutes in 48 hours. The first night he actually slept. He woke on the floor with his hands around an invisible dressing, trying to hold pressure on a wound that had already taken what it wanted. That pattern lasted months, then years. Insomnia hardened into routine. Hypervigilance became posture. The headache storms arrived without warning in grocery aisles. Hearing rooms, anywhere fluorescent light could flicker at the wrong angle. He adapted because adaptation was the job. He retired because adaptation had a cost ceiling. He did not stop being operational. He just ran operations in smaller terrain, apartment exits, clinic corridors, claim deadlines, grocery budgets, one dog, one hearing, one line he would not let bureaucrats cross. At 1:52, his phone buzzed once with a calendar reminder Elena had entered into his appeal app 2 weeks earlier. Hearing 4B/ bring full file plus neuro letters. He looked at the screen, then set it face down. Elena wrote reminders the way medics wrote med cards. Plain and precise, because she understood that injury made memory unreliable, and dignity required systems that accounted for damage instead of denying it existed. Atlas moved first, as he always did when Mitchell's pulse spiked. Ears forward, body close, breathing slow enough for imitation. Mitchell matched it without thinking. Inhale 4, hold 4, out 6, again. By 2:30, the storm had moved east, and the building settled into that dangerous quiet where every pipe tick sounded like a step in the hall. Mitchell went to the metal lockbox under his table and opened it with a key he kept on his dog tags. Inside were 3 things he touched before every hard date. Daniel Voss's mission, coin darkened at the edges, his own retirement orders, and the folder marked MWD Disposition Review. The folder was thick from handling, corners soft, tabs rewritten twice. The adoption fight had started with one line on a transfer notice. MWD Atlas, reassigned pending disposition center capacity. Pending meant paperwork. Capacity meant separation. Mitchell had gone to Fort Saylor Disposition Center the same afternoon in uniform, concussion haze pushing behind his eyes, and found Atlas in Kennel Row C with a temporary tag zip-tied to the gate. The facility smelled like bleach and wet concrete and old stress. 12 retired dogs were in that row, each with service numbers and reduced options. Some watched the corridor with alert curiosity. Some stared through it like they had already been told nobody was coming. Atlas stood when he saw Mitchell and set both front paws against the gate without barking, eyes fixed, waiting for instruction that did not include goodbye. The kennel chief, Senior Chief Malloy, met Mitchell by intake with a clipboard and a face that had delivered bad news too many times. "Reg says you're not automatic placement," he said. "Housing Review flagged your medical retirement status." "My status is exactly why he stays with me," Mitchell replied. Malloy looked at Atlas, then back at the form. "I'm not arguing merit. I'm telling you the lane." So Mitchell ran the lane. Then he ran around it when it failed. He filed first-level adoption request with handler continuity documentation. Denied. Insufficient residential yard square footage. He filed second-level appeal with veterinary stability letter. Denied. Applicant headache episodes might impede animal care. He submitted team affidavits from 2 former element members and 1 corpsman who wrote, in block script, that Atlas had already interrupted 3 nighttime panic episodes and reduced emergency calls by half. Response: under review. He completed a home inspection where an assessor measured floor plan with laser tape and asked if he owned breakable glass furniture, as if trauma could be mitigated by interior design. Mitchell answered every question. He signed every line. He kept his voice level, even when he wanted to tear the table in half. One hearing officer suggested temporary foster placement while long-term suitability was evaluated. Mitchell looked at the woman across the desk and said, "He has done 4 deployments and bled for this country. He is not transitional inventory." The room went quiet. The officer wrote something down and did not meet his eyes. At month 6, the transfer order moved from pending to scheduled. Atlas was due to leave Fort Saylor at 0600 for an out-of-state veteran kennel network with rotating handlers. Mitchell drove there at 0435 and stood by the loading bay while rain soaked his sleeves. Crates were lined in 2 rows under sodium lights. Atlas was already in harness, left hips stiff in the cold, gaze searching until it found him. 5 minutes, a transport tech said. Mitchell crouched, set both hands on Atlas's face, and pressed forehead to forehead. "Hold," he whispered. Atlas held. At 5:58, Malloy came out of the office with a fax in hand and raised it once over his head like a signal flag. "Stay order," he called. "Command review granted. Dog doesn't move." Mitchell closed his eyes for exactly 1 breath, then nodded like this was expected. It had taken 9 months, 3 command channels, 2 medical endorsements, 1 congressional inquiry packet he never wanted to file, and a letter from Daniel Voss's mother stating that Atlas was the only witness left who had stood between her son's team and death more than once. Approval came on month 9, day 4. Handler adoption authorized. Permanent placement. He framed nothing. He celebrated nothing. He took Atlas home, set a water bowl by the door, and slept 3 hours in a row for the first time in a year. Mitchell closed the disposition folder and pulled the second binder forward, the one Elena had flagged with the yellow tabs. Service record /Atlas. Atlas watched his face while he opened it. Page 1 held the compressed facts the military loved because numbers looked clean even when lives weren't. MWD Atlas, German Shepherd. 4 deployments, 19 live explosive detections, 23 American and partner force lives attributed saved. Retired following combat injury, Kandahar compound breach, left hip shrapnel penetration. Mitchell ran his thumb across the photo, clipped to the corner. Atlas younger there, muzzle darker, harness tight, eyes bright under dust. Behind him, a mud wall and a blown metal gate. Now, the Kandahar breach happened before dawn on a winter operation, when ground frost made every surface sound loud. Atlas alerted at the first doorway, ears pinned, body rigid, nose fixed on a seam in packed dirt. No human would have noticed. Mitchell signaled halt. EOD found pressure plate assembly wired under debris where the lead stack would have stepped 30 seconds later. 19 detections was a line in a report. In the field, it was 19 mornings where someone's child did not get a folded flag. The injury came on detection 20. Compound interior, secondary courtyard, hostile fire from upper window. Atlas had broken left on command to clear a narrow passage when an explosive fragment showered from a wall strike and drove into his hip above the joint. Mitchell heard the impact before he saw blood, a hard metallic crack and a yelp cut short, because Atlas kept moving 2 steps on discipline before his rear leg failed. "Down! Atlas! Down!" Mitchell had ordered, dropping beside him behind low cover. Atlas obeyed, panting hard, eyes locked on Mitchell's face. No panic, just pain and trust. Corman Reyes slid in with trauma kit, gloves slick from dust and sweat. "Entry left lateral," he said. "Need evac now." Mitchell kept one hand on Atlas's chest through the extraction countdown, feeling each breath rattle. When the medevac bird finally lifted, Atlas's head stayed in Mitchell's lap the whole flight, ears twitching at engine pitch as if still working threat vectors through sedation haze. Surgery pulled most shrapnel. Not all. One fragment stayed near the joint where removal risked nerve damage. Prognosis: chronic pain, reduced sprint tolerance, weather-sensitive inflammation, functional for limited duty, then medical retirement. After retirement, there was no parade, no donor wall, no speech in a clean auditorium. There was a short handoff at a kennel office, a signature, a photo for internal archive, and a file moved from active to closed. Forgotten heroes were archived efficiently. Mitchell did not forget. He learned Atlas's cold weather gait, changes, and adjusted walks before the limp set in. He kept anti-inflammatory meds in a labeled organizer beside his own migraine prescriptions. He massaged the scarred hip with warm towel wraps on storm nights while Atlas sighed and leaned his full weight against Mitchell's leg. He replaced high jumps with ramps, hard fetch with scent games, long patrol pace with deliberate loops around the block at off hours when crowds were thin. By 3:47, Mitchell had read every tab Elena marked, signed the affidavit page she needed for morning submission, and rechecked the evidence drive twice. Atlas rested his chin on Mitchell's boot, eyes half closed now, guard still active. Mitchell set the binder down, crouched, and scratched the fur at Atlas's neck where tan met black. "You saved them," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "You saved me, too." Atlas rose, stepped in close despite the hip stiffness, and pressed his head into Mitchell's chest until Mitchell's breathing finally dropped into a human rhythm. Outside, the rain started again, softer this time, and the apartment held. The lines to hearing room 4B were still in place, but so were the 2 survivors who had spent years learning how to stand their ground when systems counted on them to break. The corridor outside hearing room 4B slammed back into focus, with Elena Ruiz's breath breaking into thin, ragged pulls against Graham Prescott's hand. Mitchell tasted blood again and knew exactly whose blood it was, exactly how long he had before hypoxia stole Elena's legs completely, exactly how quickly Atlas could end this if he gave a single word. The marble floor reflected donor plaques and fluorescent glare like polished ice. A denial packet lay split open by Elena's shoe, red denied stamps facing up, timestamp lines visible. The camera dome over the exit sign held steady, red light on. Recording? Useful later, if there was a later. At 9:14 a.m., 27 adults still stood inside arm's reach violence and pretended they needed instructions. The clerk in the navy blazer had finally lifted her head, but she still clutched her clipboard like procedure could shield her from memory. One security officer had widened his stance. The other kept touching his radio and taking his hand away, as if duty had become hot metal. A physician in blue scrubs stood at a half-open doorway with one hand on the push bar, body angled to retreat. The retired staff sergeant with the cane had tears bright in his eyes and did not move. Nobody was confused. Nobody was uncertain. They were calculating risk in real time and assigning Elena the bill. Nobody helped. Prescott kept Elena pinned against the wall, his thumb riding under her jawline, in deliberate pressure, fingers cinched across her airway. Her lanyard had twisted around her neck and shoulder, the clipped badge turned backward so her name was unreadable. Mitchell knew her name anyway. He knew the way she carried two pens because one always died mid-shift. He knew she took Route 14 at dawn and packed her nephew's lunch before sleeping. He knew she had built his appeal packet line by line, while everyone else told her to protect her career. Seeing her boots slip on the polished floor while a man with clean sneakers squeezed the air out of her made something cold and old settle into Mitchell's spine. Elena got one scraping whisper out. "Mitchell." He heard no panic in it, just oxygen debt and refusal. The same refusal she wore when supervisors told her to drop the metadata issue. The same refusal she wore at 0600 intake when she hand-carried his file through doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Her eyes were wet and furious now, pupils blown wide from strain, but she still fixed on him, not as a plea, as confirmation. She had done her part. Now he would do his. Atlas's ears pinned forward, his body locked. A growl rolled low in his chest, deep enough to vibrate the leash against Mitchell's scarred hand. Prescott glanced down and smirked at the dog. He still saw fur and liability. He still saw a thing to threaten. "Control your animal," he said, louder for the hallway, then kicked at Atlas again with the edge of his designer soul. The impact landed high behind Atlas's foreleg, with a hard, flat sound that bounced off stone and glass. Atlas absorbed it, shifted half an inch for balance, and held. No yelp, no snap. Tan and black saddleback coat, dark as iron in the fluorescent wash. Eyes fixed on centerline. Shoulders lowered, hind legs loaded. Mitchell felt the readiness transmit up the leash like current, disciplined and exact. Atlas had done this in worse places under mortar smoke and broken concrete. He had found pressure plates buried under packed dirt, while men with rifles stepped where he told them not to. He had taken shrapnel and kept his focus on command. A spoiled committee air and a leather jacket was not novel threat terrain. Prescott leaned closer to Elena until his watch face flashed at her cheek. "You file one more packet," he hissed. "You're done in this county." He shifted her sideways by the throat like moving office furniture. Her heels skidded. The folder pages fanned wider across the floor. A page stamped "Non-Service Related" in coded black text slid under a bench, where two men in business casual lifted their feet rather than touch it. Mitchell watched all of it and filed it all. The pressure angle on Elena's neck, the exact wording of the threat, The second kicked to a retired service K9, the bystander field, the recording light, the security delay. Evidence was already stacking in front of him faster than fear. He wiped the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand. Red streaked his knuckles. His jaw ached where Prescott's fist had landed. Old scar tissue burning along the line toward his ear, but pain came to him as information, not command. His breathing was steady. His left foot shifted 5 inches to clear blindside approach. Atlas mirrored without cue, leash tension clean, no slack to tangle. A radio finally cracked from the checkpoint. Unit to 4B corridor, status check. Neither guard answered. Prescott heard the radio and laughed again, brittle now, a sound with edges. You see this? He called to the room. This is my building. This hearing is mine. He looked straight at the nearest officer. Stand down unless you want your contract gone by lunch. The officer froze with his thumb hovering over transmit. Payroll beat oath in one sentence. Mitchell did not look at the guard. He looked at Prescott's hand on Elena's throat and spoke 3 words in a voice that did not rise. Let her go. The corridor quieted around that sentence. Even the fluorescent buzz seemed to flatten. Prescott turned his head toward Mitchell, with Elena still trapped in his grip, and for half a second he looked honestly puzzled, as if he had heard a language he recognized but from the wrong mouth. Then his face reset into practiced contempt. You don't give orders here, he said. My father owns this pavilion, this board, this process. He jutted his chin toward Mitchell's uniform. You want benefits? Be grateful you got a chair. Mitchell's expression did not change. Last warning. 2 words this time. Calm as winter water. Prescott's nostrils flared. He had expected bargaining, shouting, or fear. He got none. He tightened his hold on Elena to prove he still could, and Elena made a sharp, choking sound that cut through every excuse in the hall. The retired staff sergeant surged up half an inch from his bench and sat back down, shoulders folding as if shame had physical weight. The clerk dropped her pen. It struck marble, rolled, and stopped against a page stamped, Denied. Atlas rose. Not a lunge, not a bark. A controlled vertical lift through shoulders and hips that brought his head level with Prescott's striking hand. His paws set with mechanical precision. Nails clicked once on stone, ears forward. Body a loaded spring held by training and trust. The growl in his chest deepened into a resonant warning that made 2 bystanders step back in perfect sync. Mitchell did not tighten the leash. He did not need to. Atlas held because Mitchell held. Prescott's free hand came off Elena and reached toward Atlas's collar out of reflex and ego. Fingers spread, fast and clumsy. He stopped 3 inches short. In Atlas's eyes, he met the part of military discipline civilians romanticized and never understood. Not anger, not chaos, but conditioned commitment to finish a task once declared. Prescott's hand hovered, then trembled once. His pupils widened. For the first time since he entered the hallway, uncertainty cracked through his posture. Mitchell saw it register and gave him exactly 1 more chance. Hand off, Mitchell said. Prescott looked at him fully then, really looked, and the room's hierarchy shifted again. Early gray at Mitchell's temples now read as mileage, not age. The scar crossing his jawline registered as old violence survived, not cosmetic damage. Blood marked Mitchell's mouth with no adrenaline performance attached. NWU Type 3 sat on him like second skin, squared seams, steady hands, no wasted motion. In front of him stood a man who had already run this scenario to conclusion and was offering mercy in procedural increments. The second guard keyed his radio at last. Active assault. 4B. Need response now. His voice shook hard on the final word. Footsteps sounded from the stairwell, rapid and uneven. More witnesses arriving late. Prescott heard them and grabbed for control with the only script he knew. "You touch me," he snapped at Mitchell, "and your claim dies today. Her job dies with it." He jerked his chin toward Elena. "I blacklist both of you." Elena's knees buckled. Her fingers slipped from Prescott's wrist. Her face had gone mottled, lips darkening at the corners. Mitchell stepped in one pace, measured and direct, bringing his shoulder line square to Prescott's center. Atlas matched the step, silent, body aligned at Mitchell's left knee. The leash made a short arc and settled. "Release," Mitchell said. Prescott bared his teeth in a grin that no longer reached his eyes. "You think cameras scare me?" Mitchell flicked one glance to the red light above the exit sign, then back. "They don't miss." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Prescott followed Mitchell's glance without meaning to, saw the camera, saw the little red indicator, saw the pages on the floor with timestamps, saw the guards finally on radio, saw the bystanders now watching him instead of avoiding him. For the first time, he appeared to understand not just danger, but record. Not just conflict, but chain of consequence. Atlas's growl rolled lower, steady thunder under restraint. Prescott swallowed. It was small. Everyone saw it. His grip on Elena loosened by a fraction, then tightened again from habit. That fraction was enough for Mitchell to read the collapse beginning behind Prescott's eyes. The exact instant a man raised on immunity recognized a room where immunity had expired. He had assaulted a federal claimant on camera in a posted hearing zone. He had kicked a retired MWD in front of sworn staff. He had threatened retaliation against a clinician with witnesses and audio. He had announced ownership out loud while the recording light burned red above him like a fixed star. He had finally walked into a moment his family name could not buy back, and he knew it. Prescott's fingers opened at last, not from mercy but from arithmetic, and Elena dropped to both knees with a sound like a hard exhale torn in half. Mitchell stepped through the gap, caught her under the shoulders, and pulled her clear of the wall while Atlas held the line at his left knee, rigid and silent, muzzle tracking Prescott's hands. Elena coughed in dry, scraping bursts, one palm at her throat, the other gripping Mitchell's sleeve hard enough to wrinkle the camouflage. Her lanyard hung twisted, badge still backward. Behind them, the unattended IV pump kept beeping in the same indifferent rhythm it had held through the assault. No one could pretend they had misread the moment now. "Air in," Mitchell said. Elena nodded once and dragged in a shallow breath. The stairwell door slammed open. 2 VA police officers came first. Then a shift lieutenant with a body camera already recording, and behind them Deputy Briggs from the checkpoint detail, face pale, radio still in his hand. Prescott recovered his voice before anyone touched him. "You're done," he snapped at Briggs. "Stand them down. My father owns this pavilion." The lieutenant did not even look at him. He looked at Elena's throat, at Mitchell's split lip, at Atlas's flank where the kick had landed, then up at the red recording light above the exit sign. "Graham Prescott," he said flat and clear. "Hands where I can see them." Prescott laughed once, searching for the old script. "Call Leonard Prescott." "You can call counsel," the lieutenant said. "You don't run this scene." That was the first layer gone. Prescott tried the second. "Briggs, tell him who signs your contracts." Briggs swallowed. His thumb shook on the radio, but he met the lieutenant's eyes and said, "Assault in progress was observed. Verbal stand-down order came from Mr. Prescott." He glanced at Elena, and then at the floor, shame burning through his voice. "I delayed response. I'm stating that for record." The corridor went very quiet around that sentence. The clerk in the navy blazer took one step forward, clutching her clipboard to her chest, and spoke before fear could close her throat again. "Timestamps are on my intake log," she said. "He threatened her at 9:14 and again at 9:15. I wrote the exact words." She held out the clipboard with both hands. "I froze. I still wrote." Second layer gone. The retired staff sergeant with the cane rose carefully, knees shaking, and moved to stand beside Elena and Mitchell. "I witnessed the chokehold," he said. "Name's Owen Pike, Army, retired." He set his cane tip against a page stamped "Denied," pinning it in place so it would not slide under another bench. "Put that page in evidence bag. Upper right corner has the denial timestamp." A younger man pushed in from the far doorway at that moment, breathless, eyes wide. "Dad?" he said, reaching for Pike's elbow. Pike did not look away from Prescott when he answered. "Stay here, Caleb." Caleb took his father's free hand and held it through the rest of the arrest. Third layer gone. Prescott pivoted, tried Elena next, voice turning sharp with panic. "You are finished in this county." Elena lifted her chin despite the bruising already surfacing at her neck. Her voice came rough but steady. "That threat's on camera, too." Atlas's growl dropped one final note and stopped when Mitchell's fingers touched the fur behind his ear. The dog's ears rotated, then reset forward, still tracking. A VA medic knelt beside Elena with an oxygen mask and pulse oximeter, and Elena accepted both without argument, eyes never leaving Prescott. The lieutenant guided Prescott to the wall, cuffed him, and read charges in clipped sequence. Battery, assault on federal property, intimidation of a witness, interference with adjudicative proceedings. When he added suspected records tampering pending record seizure, Prescott jerked against the cuffs and barked, "You can't charge me for process." A new voice answered from the hall entrance. "We can if process was fraud." Special Agent Dana Klein from VAOIG stepped in with 2 investigators and a hard case for digital collection. She was gray-haired, knuckles scarred, expression all steel. "Mr. Prescott, we have preservation authority effective now. Phones, office terminals, and committee servers are locked." She turned to Elena. "Ruiz, report number 77431. You called 3 days ago about denial anomalies. We pulled your upload queue at 0612 this morning after your follow-up email. It matches what we're seeing." Elena stared at her through the oxygen mask, then gave one stunned nod. External contact resolved. By 10:46, the corridor had become a chain of custody lane. The denied pages were bagged, labeled, and logged with the same timestamp Elena had fought to protect. The clerk's clipboard went into evidence after copies were certified. Mitchell handed over Elena's primary packet, his own tabbed binder, and the evidence drive he had checked at 3:47, signing each transfer line in block letters. Agent Klein asked for any backup copy. Elena, voice still scraped raw, told her about the manila envelope in locker C19 behind spare socks and an energy bar. A female officer retrieved it on camera and logged it unopened. Nothing disappeared this time. Physical evidence resolved. At 11:32, Hearing Room 4B reopened under emergency supervision, with a federal adjudicator flown in from the regional office and 2 court reporters seated shoulder to shoulder. The fluorescent buzz was the same. The marble was the same. The power map was not. Mitchell sat in the first row, Atlas at his boot, harness on, the crooked stitch line Mateo had made visible near the D-ring beside a clipped body cam module that had captured the entire corridor sequence. Elena sat to Mitchell's right with a cold pack wrapped in a towel at her throat, one hand resting on the table edge to keep it from shaking. Owen Pike sat behind them, Caleb still holding his hand. Prescott was absent. His chair stayed empty. The adjudicator spoke without preamble. We are entering into record video evidence from hallway dome camera, checkpoint audio, and MWD handler body cam. We are also entering denial metadata, committee edit logs, and neurologist testimony. The neurologist testified first. Plain and unembellished. Blast-related injury pattern, chronic migraine clusters, sleep disruption, service linkage supported by timeline and imaging. Then, the compliance attorney from Prescott's committee, the same woman who had warned about audit exposure, asked to amend her prior statement and produced internal slides from the fifth-floor meeting, including a line item labeled Behavioral Claim Conversion Yield. Her voice shook once and steadied. We were instructed to call this efficiency, she said. It was revenue routing. Loaded setup resolved. When the hospital VP, who had cut himself off weeks earlier, took the stand, he finished the sentence he had never finished. If hearing officers received full metadata, the manipulation would be visible, he said. That is why packets were delayed. Another layer collapsed. At 1:08 p.m., the adjudicator read the ruling into record. Mitchell Clark's disability claim was granted in full with retroactive compensation, immediate treatment authorization, and a formal written apology from the Agency for Wrongful Denials. She ordered expedited review of all similarly coded claims routed through Prescott's task force. She directed referral suspensions to the private network pending criminal and civil audit. Mitchell closed his eyes for one breath and let it land. He did not smile. He put his hand on Atlas's neck and held. At 4:20 p.m., board staff unscrewed the brushed metal Prescott Veterans Pavilion letters from the marble wall outside 4B while employees watched in a silence that felt like pressure leaving a sealed room. No speeches, no brass band, just tools, ladders, and bolts dropping one by one into a plastic tray. The old plaque went into an evidence crate, not storage. By the second Tuesday of December, the replacement marker was installed in the same stone. Ruiz Voss Medics Memorial Pavilion, dedicated to military medics and support staff who kept people breathing when systems failed them. Distinctive detail resolved. The name became evidence, then history. That evening, after the hearing and the statements and the signatures, Mitchell sat on a bench in the quieter side corridor while the building emptied. His hands had started to shake only after it was over, fine tremors at first, then deeper through his forearms as the adrenaline burned off. Atlas stepped in without command and pressed his head into Mitchell's chest. Full weight, steady pressure. The same practiced anchor that had pulled him back from 0-200 storms for years. Mitchell folded both arms around the dog's neck and stayed there until his breathing stopped catching. Elena came down the hall with Mateo beside her, backpack crooked, hair windblown, face serious in that small boy way that looked older than 8. He carried a folded square of fabric in both hands like it might tear. When Atlas lifted his head, Mateo stopped one step away and said, "For service," then offered the patch. The stitching was uneven. The thread color didn't match. The words were blocky and fierce. "Still here." Atlas sniffed it once, then nudged Mateo's wrist with his nose and sat, perfectly square, while Mateo fastened the patch to the harness loop with clumsy fingers. Elena knelt slowly beside them, throat bandage visible above her collar, and for the first time since the corridor, she let herself lean into stillness. Owen Pike and Caleb passed at the end of the hall. Caleb's arm was around his father's shoulders, and Pike lifted his cane in a small salute without breaking stride. The physician who had backed through the doorway never submitted a statement. The record noted his non-response. Everything else answered. Before they left, Elena checked one last thing on her phone and turned the screen to Mitchell. VA Records Integrity had sent the callback summary in writing. Report 77431 substantiated. Referral for prosecution complete. Impacted case review underway. She saved it to 3 places, emailed copies to Klein, and printed one for the paper file because she no longer trusted any truth with only one address. Mitchell looked at the message, then at Elena, then down at Atlas, wearing Mateo's crooked patch under sterile hallway light. They built a pipeline, Elena said quietly. Called it policy. Mitchell nodded once. Now it's evidence. They walked out together into cold air that smelled like rain on stone and distant bus exhaust. Mateo between them, Atlas close at Mitchell's left leg, and no one in that building mistook silence for safety anymore.